We're here today at the fantastic Glebe fishery in Leicestershire. This place is absolutely stuffed with fish. And I've been fishing quite a few matches recently and catching loads of fish on a short pole and loose feeding hard pellets. It's a really simple tactic, but definitely worthwhile when you catch beautiful fish like that. I've been having some massive weights recently, and here's my top tips to make the best of the method. So first up, let's talk about where I'm actually going to fish. Now, the water's warm, it's a little bit overcast today. That tells me the fish are going to be really actively feeding, but they're going to be feeding in slightly deeper water. The carp are naturally sun worshippers. When the sun's out, they want to sit in the upper layers. When it's not so sunny like it is today, they sit a little bit deeper. So, this is when the short line really comes into play. As always, I like to start off the session by putting on a nice heavy plummet, 30 gram plummet. I'm using quite heavy elastic, so I want a positive reading. And I'm not going to fish far out. I was actually on this particular lake yesterday and caught loads of fish just there, a section and a half, plus the top kit out from the bank. So, although I've got a fantastic pole to fish with, you don't need any special kit really to fish this method. So, a section and a half out from the bank. I've actually got a full section there, a little short half number 4 there, and then my short top kit. So you can see 4.5, 5 meters out from the bank. Now there's loads of benefits to fishing that short. Firstly, I know the bottom is going to be hard. I'm not going to be fishing in any silt, so when the fish come in to feed, I'm not going to have any issues with fish clouding up the bottom, my peg fizzing, and the fish not being able to find my hook bait because it's so dark down there because they've kicked up so much silt. Those fish are going to feed really positively over a nice hard bottom. Secondly, we're not on a really steep shelf there, so I've got a nice flat area of probably the size of a dinner plate where I can present my rig and actually present some loose feed. Although it's quite close to my fishing position, you've got to remember, when the water temperature is high, carp especially, they want to feed. They're really aggressive feeders, and if I'm feeding lots of bait there, the fish are going to come to me. You know, it's summertime, just going into autumn maybe, and those fish really want to be on the feed. So by fishing short, I can feed large amounts of bait by hand accurately and make a nice noise on the water as well by doing so. Now let's talk about the rig. I like to keep all of my fishing really simple, basically as simple as I possibly can. We'll start from the hook and work up towards the elastic and the pole. I've got a size 16 hook, it's an eyed hook, and I've tied it on the hook length, knotless knot style, and I've got a little tiny bait band on a little hair rig there. And what I've actually done is I've whipped a long way down the hook. That way I can keep everything in line. So when I actually put a pellet on this in that bait band, everything stays in line. I don't get the hair kicking up the shank of the hook too much, and everything's more direct this way. The presentation I find is a little bit better. So size 16 hook. The line is 0.16 diameter, that's the hook length. I use an 8-inch hook length. I like a little bit more movement when I'm fishing for bigger carp, especially when I'm using heavier hook baits. And I've got a loop-to-loop attachment to the main line. I like to use a really robust main line for my carp fishing. That's 0.20, 020 main line. Shotting, I'm using slot shot, mainly because they're far kinder to your line. I like the way that you can move them up and down your line. They don't cause any damage to your line. And to be fair, slot shot, if I did have to put one on the hook length, it doesn't fuss me one bit because they're so kind to your line. I've got, this rig is shot with number 9s, and I've actually found today that a bulk and 2 droppers has been best. So a number 9 just above the 8-inch hook length, a number 9, another 4-inch above that, and then I've got a bulk. I'm catching really well, so I want that bulk to get the bait down to the fish, keep the rig nice and steady, and anchor the rig in amongst those feeding fish. Now if the fishing was a little bit harder, I'd probably go for a bit more of a strung out pattern, probably over the same space as the rig, but I'd string that bulk out a little bit more for a little bit more freedom. So let's go a bit further up, talk about the float. Nice thick bristle pole float. That's actually got a 2mm bristle on. I'm fishing with hard pellets today, 6mm or 8mm hook baits. I want a nice thick bristle that's able to support the weight of that that hook bait without being dragged under once we get any tow on the water. A wire stem for stability, and that float is 4x14 size, and we're fishing in 4.5, 5 foot of water, which I think is about right, that size of float. If I was to go any deeper than 5 foot, I'd move up to a 4x16, and any shallower than sort of like 3 foot, then I'd go to a 4x12 float. You might notice that I've got a really short length of line between the pole tip and the elastic. I like to be really accurate when I'm fishing. Often when you're fishing short, you're fishing on some sort of slope, and that means that by fishing with a short line, the float isn't drifting around the peg too much, and I'm being really accurate. Also means that when I'm striking at little tiny dips on the float, I've got a far quicker reaction time. To help with the reaction time, I don't mess around with any fancy connectors when I'm fishing heavy elastics. I like to just use a good old-fashioned crow's foot. It means that, again, there's nothing in between the float and the elastic to delay that reaction time. The elastic, it's reactor core, midi reactor core. I get on really well with this elastic. This is the pink reactor core that seems to be really, really forgiving on the strike, but it powers up so quickly. I think it's because it's got such a narrow bore. It almost acts a little bit like a solid. It's almost like a solid stroke hollow hybrid elastic. Works really well, lasts really long as well. Top kit wise, I've got a little short top kit. I find these are great for playing fish, getting fish in the net far quicker. And as always, I've got the elastic running through down to a puller kit. So you can probably see there, pretty standard stuff. It's about how we present the rig and how we feed the swim, which I think is the most important aspect of this method. Let's get on to what we're actually going to feed the swim with today. Now, I'm going to use one bait as feed today. We're fishing in 4.5 foot of water. I don't want something too big. Likewise, I don't want something too small. So I've plumped for 6mm hard pellets. These are Swim Stim carp pellets, and the Amino Originals, a really, really potent pellet that carp seem to love. And importantly, they're all of a very uniform size, which I think is really important when you're looking to throw them any distance, and also looking for a really nice uniform sink rate in the water column. So on my throwing side, I've got some pellets for throwing. On my actual hook bait side, because I'm a little bit cack-handed when it comes to feeding and fishing, I have 2 side trays. I've got 2 little tubs with different hook baits in. Now, I've got the 6mm that I'm feeding as hook bait, and 9 times out of 10, they're the hook bait that I prefer to use. It matches what I'm feeding. The fish feel much more confident taking what you're actually feeding them. But if I feel that there's a load of fish in the peg, or I want to escape the attention of any nuisance fish, or I want to keep my hook bait a little bit more still, so I need something a little bit heavier, I've got with me some 8mm, and they'll simply slip in the band just like the 6mm will. Both of those hook baits will be banded. The size 16 hook will suit both of those hook baits perfectly. Now, let's get on to actually feeding the peg. I like to start off nice and cautiously. I always start a session cautiously. I imagine that early on in a session, the fish aren't actually ravenous for any bait. Fish are cold-blooded. As the day warms up, so do the fish, and they start feeding more aggressively. So what I like to do is just make a rattle on the surface with sort of 4 pellets, and maybe keep doing that every 20 seconds or so, just to create a bit of interest in the swim. What I'm looking to do is gather a few fish in the area and actually spark them into making a mistake. So by feeding sort of like 4 pellets quite frequently, I'm not overfeeding the fish, I'm not putting them on guard, and my hook bait is going to get targeted far easier. Now, as the session goes on, it might be worth reining a few pellets in. And when I talk about reining them in, I'm talking about 10 pellets maximum. But every 30 seconds, we're looking to keep fish interested in the peg at all times. And one of the best ways of doing that is by making a noise on the surface. So you can hear the rattle as those pellets goes in. That's what attracts fish. Fish are so tuned into the noise that pellets make now on the water surface that they home into them, smell the pellets, bang, they're on the bottom, you get a bite. That's the theory anyway. Let's see if we can put it into practice. I've waffled on enough about how good this method is. Now, before it absolutely chucks it down, it looks a little bit black behind me, I'm going to try and catch you a fish in real time. So, 6mm pellet in the band. Make sure it's nicely central around the pellet. And we're going to ship out to the spot. As you can see, less than 5 meters out from where I'm fishing. We've caught a few fish here today, so hopefully the response should be quite quick. I started off feeding 4 pellets each time, but now I've upped it up to sort of half a dozen, 6, 7, 8 pellets, feeding it in 2 lots, lifting the rig, drop it. And hopefully you can see one of the advantages of fishing so short is that you can be so accurate with your bait when you're throwing it. I always like to lift the rig, lower it in. When I'm feeding in quite an active way, I like to fish my rig in quite an active way. So what I'm trying to do is mimic that loose feed falling through the water all the time. Little indication there shows there's a fish in the peg. Another 2 lots of pellets goes in. I'm not piling the bait in, you can see I'm not piling the bait in, I'm just trying to trick a fish into making a mistake, and there you go. Little tiny dip of the float, the fish is on. And you can see with that short line, your reaction time when you're hitting a bite is so much faster. Now, the important part, when you hook a fish, I always take my time. There's no point rushing the fish when you hook it. You've got to make sure every fish ends up in the net. Whether I'm fishing, just having a bit of a mess around against my mates, practicing, fishing a match, if I make sure every fish I hook ends up in the net, I know I'm onto a winner. Nice and gently play the fish in. You let the elastic do the work. There you go, he's in the net. Beautiful common carp. And let's see if we can hold him up for you. So there you go, a fish in real time to prove that such a simple method gets results. Thanks for watching. Tight lines.